As Mama Nyar descended into the chasm, the very air seemed to shift around her. The ground beneath her feet was jagged, treacherous, as though it resented her presence, but she pressed on, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The deeper she went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if she were entering the very belly of the earth, a place where the forces of nature were born, where time had no meaning, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend. The air was thick with heat, and the walls of the chasm radiated an ancient energy that made her skin crawl. She could hear the distant sounds of rumbling, the deep groans of the earth shifting and moving as if alive, but there was no turning back now. She was committed to this journey, whatever the cost. After what felt like hours, the narrow passage widened into a vast underground cavern, stretching farther than her eyes could see. The ceiling arched high above, filled with massive stalactites that glistened like teeth in the dim light. The ground was uneven, covered in sharp rocks and strange, glowing moss that illuminated the space with an eerie, unearthly glow. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, dark and ancient, covered in layers of moss and vine. It was a place of power, a nexus where the forces of the earth converged. The very energy of the cavern pulsed around her, swirling in the air like a living thing. Mama Nyar's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the altar, her senses heightened. It was here, she knew, that the ancient forces lay dormant, waiting for someone to awaken them. She could feel their presence, pressing against her like a weight, testing her resolve. "I have come," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear that clung to her bones. "I seek to restore the balance of the earth, to heal the land that has been fractured. I ask for your help." Her words echoed in the cavern, but the silence that followed was suffocating. There was no response, only the low rumble of the earth beneath her feet, as though it was considering her plea. She stepped forward and placed her hands on the cold stone altar, the ancient energy coursing through her as if the very earth were testing her strength. She closed her eyes, letting the power of the cavern fill her, her mind clearing as she sought to connect with the deep forces that resided here. For a moment, there was nothing but the rhythm of her breath and the steady pulse of the earth's energy, then the voice returned, but this time, it was not from the chasm. It was not from the air, but from the very ground itself, vibrating through her body. "You have come, Mama Nyar," the voice rumbled, deep and resonant, its tone now heavy with both power and caution. "But you do not understand the weight of what you ask. You seek to restore what was once broken, but know this, some fractures cannot be healed. Some pieces of the land have been lost to time. They are beyond repair, beyond even your reach." Mama Nyar's heart tightened in her chest, but her resolve did not waver. "I understand the cost," she said, her voice firm. "But I will not let this land fall into ruin. The village of Nyoka depends on me, and I will do what must be done." The voice seemed to pause, considering her words. Then, with a deep sigh that shook the very air around her, it spoke again. "Very well," it said, the words heavy with both finality and warning. "You have chosen your path. But be warned, the forces you awaken are not bound to your will. They are as old as the earth itself, and they will not be controlled. To restore balance, you must face them on their terms. To heal the land, you must be willing to sacrifice more than you know. Are you prepared to pay the price?" Mama Nyar felt a chill run through her, but she did not hesitate. "I am ready," she said, her voice resolute, her heart steady despite the weight of the decision before her. The ground beneath her trembled once more, and the air grew heavy with the sound of distant thunder. The cavern seemed to pulse with energy, as if the earth itself was awakening from a long slumber. Slowly, the stone altar began to shift, its surface crackling with ancient magic. A brilliant light, bright and blinding, erupted from the center of the altar, illuminating the entire cavern. Mama Nyar stood her ground, her eyes wide as the light enveloped her. She could feel the energy of the land pouring into her, flooding her body with power. It was overwhelming, consuming, but she embraced it. She could hear the whispers of the earth, the voices of the spirits that had shaped the land for millennia. The energy swirled around her, crackling with raw power, and she knew, deep in her soul, that the balance was being restored. But at what cost? The light grew brighter, and the earth beneath her feet began to shake violently. She could feel her body being pulled in different directions, as if the very forces of nature were at war within her. The land was calling for its price, and Mama Nyar could only brace herself, knowing that the true test was yet to come. The violent tremor of the earth beneath Mama Nyar's feet grew stronger, more erratic, as if the very core of the world was in turmoil. She felt as though her body was being torn apart, pulled in every direction by unseen hands. The power that coursed through her was beyond anything she had ever experienced, a raw, unfiltered force of nature. Her mind struggled to keep up with the overwhelming surge of energy that flooded her senses, blurring the lines between herself and the earth. The whispers of the spirits grew louder, their voices a cacophony of ancient knowledge and sorrow, blending into one continuous hum that reverberated through her bones. It was as though the land itself was alive, and it was speaking to her, telling her stories of long-forgotten times, of battles fought and lost, of sacrifices made and promises broken. She could feel the weight of these ancient memories pressing down on her, suffocating her. But she fought to stay grounded. She could not lose herself in this flood of power. Not now. The energy surged again, more intense than before, and for a moment, Mama Nyar was blinded by the light that exploded from the stone altar. Her body shook, every muscle straining under the immense pressure, but she held firm, standing tall despite the odds. Her fingers dug into the altar, and for a brief second, she thought she felt the pulse of a heartbeat, an ancient, primal beat that matched her own. "I accept the cost," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunderous sounds that echoed through the cavern. "I accept whatever is required of me." The ground beneath her trembled violently, and suddenly, the energy that had been flooding her body seemed to condense into one single, overwhelming point of power. She felt as if she were at the very center of the earth, at the nexus of all life and all death. A dark, oppressive force pressed in on her, testing her resolve. The air was thick with the smell of earth and smoke, and she felt the heat of the chasm radiating against her skin. And then, the voice returned. It was no longer the deep, resonant voice from before, but something more ancient, something more primal, filled with both fury and sorrow. "You seek balance, Mama Nyar," it rumbled, its voice shaking the walls of the cavern. "But balance requires sacrifice. To heal the land, you must sever a part of yourself. You must be willing to give up something precious, something that is bound to your very soul. What will you sacrifice?" Mama Nyar closed her eyes, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She knew that this was the true test, the moment where the cost of her journey would become clear. She had been warned, but she had pressed on regardless. The weight of the decision bore down on her, but she knew she could not turn back now. The village, the land, the people she loved, everything depended on her. She could not fail them. "I will sacrifice what is necessary," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "If it means the land will heal, if it means Nyoka will survive, I will give what is required." The voice seemed to pause, as though considering her words. Then, with a final, heavy sigh, it spoke again. "Very well. You have chosen. But know this, Mama Nyar, there is no coming back from this. The land will heal, but you will not be the same. What you give, you will lose forever. And when the balance is restored, you will be but a shadow of the person you once were." The ground beneath her feet began to shift violently once more, and the cavern was filled with the sound of cracking stone and howling winds. The air was thick with the energy of the earth, and Mama Nyar could feel the power that had once coursed through her beginning to drain away. It was as though the earth was claiming her very essence, consuming it to restore the land. She felt her strength waning, the world around her growing dim. She could no longer feel her body as she once had, and the overwhelming sensation of loss began to creep into her mind. It was as though something deep inside her was being severed, ripped away, leaving an emptiness in its wake. She knew then that the sacrifice had begun. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she knew that she had made the right choice. She could feel the earth responding, the balance beginning to shift as the land healed and restored itself. The energy around her began to settle, and slowly, the violent shaking of the cavern subsided. The air grew still, and the intense heat that had filled the chasm began to dissipate. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the cavern was silent. But Mama Nyar could feel it, deep beneath the surface of the earth, something had changed. The land was healing. The balance had been restored. As the light from the altar dimmed, Mama Nyar sank to her knees, exhaustion sweeping over her like a tidal wave. She could feel the weight of the sacrifice pressing down on her, the part of herself that had been severed, lost forever. Her body trembled, but her heart was steady. She had done what needed to be done. The earth had claimed its price. And now, Nyoka would be safe. The silence that enveloped the cavern was suffocating, heavy with the knowledge of what had transpired. Mama Nyar sat on the cold, jagged ground, her hands resting limply on her knees as she took slow, deliberate breaths. She could feel the presence of the ancient forces receding, no longer pressing against her, but there was a lingering, empty void inside her, a hollow space where something once was. It wasn't just a physical emptiness, but something deeper, a loss that transcended the body and touched her very soul. She had sacrificed something precious, something irreplaceable, and though the land had healed, she was irrevocably changed. Her mind struggled to process the enormity of it all, but there was a quiet peace settling in her chest. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her fingertips, steady and rhythmic, a sure sign that balance had been restored. The land that had been writhing in pain now seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, its wounds slowly knitting together, the scars of ancient battles and betrayals fading away. The world outside the chasm would be different now. Nyoka, the village she loved, would be safe. She could already feel the air shifting, the crops would grow strong once more, the animals would roam freely, and the people would no longer live in fear of the forces that had haunted them. But in the depths of her being, Mama Nyar knew that this peace came at a cost she would carry for the rest of her life. She stood slowly, her legs weak beneath her, but her resolve was firm. The light from the altar had dimmed to a faint glow, and as she made her way to the edge of the cavern, she felt the pull of the earth beneath her, urging her to move forward. Her journey was far from over. As she climbed back up the jagged walls of the chasm, the power of the land began to fade from her body, leaving behind a quiet, lingering exhaustion. Her muscles ached, her limbs felt heavy, but her heart remained resolute. She had done what was required of her. She had healed the land. Now, it was time to return to Nyoka. The ascent was slow, the path treacherous, but with each step, Mama Nyar felt the weight of the land's gratitude lifting her, guiding her back toward the surface. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she emerged from the chasm. The world above greeted her with an eerie silence, the trees still and unmoving as though holding their breath. She stepped into the sunlight, her eyes squinting against the brightness, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. The air felt different now, less oppressive, more alive. She felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, stronger and steadier, and it gave her a sense of peace she hadn't known she was searching for. Her body was weak, drained of the energy that had once surged through her, but her mind was clear. She had succeeded. Nyoka would thrive once more. As she made her way back to the village, the faces of the villagers greeted her with cautious curiosity. They had felt the shift in the air, the quiet transformation that had taken place in the land. But none could understand the true nature of her sacrifice, nor the price she had paid to restore the balance. When Mama Nyar finally reached the village, she was met by the elders. Their eyes were filled with a mixture of awe and concern, for they could see the change in her, the same change that had come over the land. It was subtle, but undeniable. She had returned, But she was not the same. The balance had been restored, yes, but at what cost? Mama Nyar gazed out at the village, her gaze steady and unwavering. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the birds sang, and the people went about their tasks. The earth beneath their feet was stable once more, the crops would grow tall, and the rivers would flow clean. The village was safe. But she could never fully return to the life she had known. She had given up a part of herself in exchange for the land's healing, and though her people would never know the true extent of her sacrifice, she carried it within her, an indelible mark on her soul. "The land is healed," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of truth. The elders nodded solemnly, understanding that the world they knew had shifted. They, too, felt the subtle change in the air, the quiet pulse of the earth beneath their feet. "You have done what none could have imagined, Mama Nyar," one elder said, his voice low and filled with respect. "You have given so much to restore balance. You are a true guardian of the land." Mama Nyar bowed her head, her eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. She had done what was necessary. But she had lost something she would never regain. Still, the village was safe. And that was all that mattered. She turned to walk away, knowing that her journey was not over. The land had healed, but her path, too, had changed. She would continue to walk it, as the guardian of Nyoka, bearing the weight of her sacrifice, but also the quiet peace that came with knowing the earth was at peace once more. The days following Mama Nyar's return to Nyoka were filled with a sense of quiet, unspoken transformation. The village had changed, the land had healed, but it was clear that something deep within her had shifted. Though she walked among the people, spoke to the elders, and resumed her duties as the village's protector, there was a certain distance between her and the world she had once known. It wasn't that she had become a stranger to the village, but rather that she was no longer the same woman who had left for the chasm. The connection she once shared with the people, with the land, felt different now. Her soul had been marked by the ancient forces she had awakened, and though the land had been restored, she carried a burden no one else could understand. She would often sit alone by the river, gazing into the flowing waters, reflecting on the sacrifice she had made. The river was different too, its waters clearer, its flow steadier, as if it, too, had been touched by the same forces that had healed the land. There were moments when Mama Nyar could feel the earth calling to her, the deep pulse beneath her feet whispering of ancient truths, of things she could no longer fully comprehend. It was as if the land had woven itself into the very fabric of her being, and now she was tethered to it in ways that could never be undone. One afternoon, as Mama Nyar sat by the river, a familiar figure approached her, Adaugo. The young woman had grown since Mama Nyar's departure, and though she was still the same spirit-filled girl, there was an undeniable maturity in her eyes. Adaugo had heard the stories of the healing, the sacrifices, and the power Mama Nyar had called upon. She knew that the woman before her was not the same, but she also recognized the strength that radiated from her. Adaugo sat beside her, the two women silent for a long moment as they watched the river flow. "The land has changed, hasn't it?" Adaugo asked, her voice soft but filled with wonder. Mama Nyar nodded slowly. "It has," she said. "The land is at peace now. But peace comes at a price." Adaugo glanced at her, sensing the weight in her words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "There are things that are lost when you awaken the forces of the earth," Mama Nyar said, her voice distant, as if she were speaking to herself as much as to a king. "Some things cannot be reclaimed. I gave a part of myself to the earth, my connection to the land, to the village, to the world around me." Adaugo frowned, sensing the deep sorrow in Mama Nyar's words. "You mean you can't feel the earth as you once did?" she asked carefully. Mama Nyar shook her head. "I can feel it," she said, her gaze turning inward, her thoughts lost in the depth of her memories. "But it's different now. The connection is there, but it's faint, as if something was torn from me in order to restore balance." Adaugo sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Mama Nyar's words. The realization that the woman who had always been so strong, so connected to the land, had lost a part of herself was difficult to bear. But Adaugo also knew that Mama Nyar had given everything for the survival of the village. She had paid the ultimate price to ensure their future. Is it worth it? Adaugo asked, her voice small, as if afraid to ask the question but needing to know. Mama Nyar turned to face her, her eyes filled with a deep understanding. She placed a hand on Adaugo's shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the sorrow that lingered in her chest. It is worth it. The land has healed, and Nyauka will thrive. But it's not just the land that needed healing. It was all of us, our spirits, our hearts. We've been fractured for so long, and now there is peace. For that peace, I would sacrifice everything. Adaugo nodded, her heart swelling with admiration and sorrow for the woman before her. She could see the quiet strength that still radiated from Mama Nyar, despite the sacrifices she had made. You will always be our protector, Adaugo said, her voice filled with reverence. No matter what has changed, you will always be the one who saved us. Mama Nyar smiled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Perhaps, she said, her gaze drifting back to the river, the soft repose of the water a reflection of the quiet turmoil inside her. But sometimes, the greatest sacrifices go unnoticed. Sometimes, the ones who give the most are the ones who are left behind. I have given everything, and now I must learn to live with the consequences. Akin looked at her with deep understanding, the weight of Mama Nyar's words settling in her heart. She could not fully comprehend the depth of the sacrifice, but she knew that the woman before her had given more than anyone should ever have to give. And yet, Mama Nyar had done it willingly, out of love for her people, out of love for Nyauka. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the land, Mama Nyar and Adaugo sat in silence, their hearts bound by a shared understanding of the cost of peace. The land was healed, the village was safe, but the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more trials to face. But for now, in this quiet moment, there was peace, a peace that Mama Nyar had earned with every ounce of her being. Weeks passed since Mama Nyar's return to Nyauka, and though the village had flourished, a palpable change lingered in the air. It was not the usual buzz of daily life, the people walking, the children playing, the elders advising. This was something deeper, an awareness that everything had shifted. Mama Nyar's sacrifice had set the course for the village's prosperity, but it had also set her apart from those she had protected. Though she still walked among the villagers, her presence was a quiet one. She no longer sought the counsel of the elders, nor did she offer guidance as freely as before. She had given so much of herself to restore the land, and now there was a quiet loneliness in her heart, a void she could not fill, no matter how hard she tried. The village was thriving. The crops were bountiful, the animals grew strong and healthy, and the spirits of the people were lighter than they had been in years. The air itself seemed to carry a new vibrancy, and there were whispers of prosperity on every street corner. But the elders knew the truth. They could feel the change in Mama Nyar, just as she felt the growing divide between her and the village she had saved. The weight of the earth that had once been so fully intertwined with her own now seemed distant, a memory of something lost. One evening, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the village in warmth, Elder Wickser sought out Mama Nyar. The elder had always been a man of few words, but his wisdom ran deep. His eyes, heavy with the burdens of age and knowledge, had watched Mama Nyar's journey closely. He had seen the strength she had carried for so long, and he had witnessed the quiet toll the land's healing had taken on her spirit. He found her sitting under the great baobab tree near the edge of the village. The tree, like the land, had been healed, its branches spread wide, its roots deep in the earth. It was a symbol of life renewed. Yet, there was no joy in Mama Nyar's eyes as she sat beneath its shade. Her gaze was distant, her hands folded in her lap as if they had forgotten the weight of the world. Elder Wixa approached slowly, his footsteps soft on the earth. He didn't speak at first, but merely sat beside her, his presence offering the comfort of understanding without the need for words. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the village in the distance, the people moving about their daily tasks. Finally, it was Mama Nyar who spoke, her voice low and heavy. "I did what was needed," she said, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "The land is healed. The people are safe. But she faltered, as though struggling to put into words what had become of her. "I gave a part of myself, Elder Wixa. A part that I will never get back." The elder nodded, his face softening with compassion. "We know," he said gently. "You have given so much, Mama Nyar. You have healed the land and saved us all. But the price of such power is not always visible to those who benefit from it. You have paid with your very essence." Mama Nyar turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sort of reassurance. "But I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "I am not the same woman who left the village. I am not the same woman who stood on that altar and made the sacrifice. There is a void inside me. A part of me that is missing, and I don't know how to fill it." The elder's eyes softened further, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "There are no easy answers to what you feel, Mama Nyar. The sacrifice you made is not one that can be easily understood by others. But there is one truth that has remained constant through all of this: you are still here. You are still alive. The land is healed because of you. And though the price has been high, there is still purpose in your life." "But how can I find that purpose when I feel so empty?" she asked, her voice strained. "How do I go on when I no longer recognize myself?" Elder Wixa sat for a moment, considering her words. "You are not the first to sacrifice yourself for the good of others, Mama Nyar," he said quietly. "And you will not be the last. The truth of it is this: the emptiness you feel will not simply disappear. It will stay with you, and that is the burden you must carry. But the people of Nyoka will always need you, just as they always have. The land has been healed, but your journey is not over. You are a bridge between the earth and the people, a protector not just of the land, but of their spirits. There is still work to be done, Mama Nyar. Your purpose is not lost, but it may take time for you to see it again." Mama Nyar listened intently, the weight of his words sinking deep within her. She felt the stirring of something inside her, a faint flicker of understanding, as if a distant light was beginning to shine through the fog of her emotions. It was true that she felt empty, but perhaps that emptiness was not a void to be feared, but a space to be filled in time. The land had been healed, and her people were safe. That was enough. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude and a quiet resolve. "Perhaps I still have a purpose, then. Perhaps I can learn to live with this emptiness." Elder Wixa nodded, his eyes filled with wisdom. "You will, Mama Nyar. You will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a soft twilight glow, Mama Nyar stood up. For the first time in weeks, she felt a quiet strength stir within her. She had made a sacrifice, yes. But she had also been given a chance to heal. And though she would never be the same, perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a new way to live with the peace she had earned, for herself and for the people she had saved. The weeks turned into months, and the rhythms of life in Nyoka continued in their quiet harmony. Mama Nyar, though still marked by her sacrifice, began to find a new sense of purpose. Her interaction with the villagers, once filled with a subtle distance, became more grounded again. It was not that she had fully regained the connection she once shared with the land, it was still faint, still elusive, but she began to accept the newness of her existence. The emptiness within her did not always feel like a void anymore, but rather like a space that allowed her to appreciate the small things in life that had once gone unnoticed. She began to spend more time with the children of the village, teaching them the old ways, the stories, the songs, the knowledge of the earth that had sustained her ancestors for generations. They didn't fully understand the depth of her power, nor the sacrifices she had made, but they were drawn to her, eager to learn, eager to listen. And in their innocence, Mama Nyar found a quiet joy. Each time she shared a story, each time she guided them through the old rituals of the land, she felt something within her stir, a flicker of the old connection that had once been so strong. It was not the same as before, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long while, she found herself beginning to smile again. The elders, too, noticed the change in her. While they had seen her retreat into herself after her return, they now observed a subtle return of the strength that had once defined her. Her actions were more deliberate, her eyes sharper, her voice more confident when she spoke to them. She had begun to accept that, though she was different, she was still Mama Nyar, the protector of Nyoka. One day, as the village prepared for a great feast to celebrate the harvest, Mama Nyar walked through the fields, her feet sinking gently into the soft earth. The crops were abundant, as they had been since the land had healed, and the scent of ripened fruits and grains filled the air. She stopped by the river, which had been her constant companion since her youth, and knelt by the water's edge. The ripples of the stream seemed to whisper to her, as if the land itself was acknowledging her presence. She closed her eyes and listened, letting the cool breeze caress her face. The earth, though different, still spoke to her. It was not as it had been in the past. There was no overwhelming surge of power, no all-consuming connection, but there was something there, a quiet hum beneath the surface, a reminder of the bond that had always existed between her and the land. She smiled softly, realizing that, though she had lost a part of herself, the land had never truly abandoned her. The land had healed, and in turn, she had healed. She was not the same woman who had stood on that altar, nor was she the same woman who had once walked the earth with unfathomable power. But she was still Mama Nyar. And the village of Nyoka still needed her. In the weeks that followed, Mama Nyar found herself walking alongside the elders once again, offering her insights on matters of the land, the harvest, and the rituals that sustained the village. Her advice was tempered by a newfound humility, a recognition that her power, though diminished, still had value in the world around her. She had become a guide, not just for the village, but for herself. The emptiness she had once feared had become a place of quiet strength, a place where she could find peace with the woman she had become. The people of Nyoka, unaware of the depth of her sacrifices, continued to look to her for wisdom and protection. But Mama Nyar had learned to walk among them without the burden of expectation. She no longer felt the need to prove herself, no longer felt that she had to be everything to everyone. She was enough, as she was, and that realization brought a sense of peace she had not known she could find. One evening, as the village gathered for the feast, Mama Nyar stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as the people laughed, danced, and celebrated the fruits of the land. The firelight flickered across their faces, and she could see the joy in their eyes, the happiness that filled the air. Adaugo, now a young woman, approached her, a smile on her lips. "The village is flourishing, Mama Nyar," she said softly. "You have done so much for us. You've given everything." Mama Nyar turned to face her, her heart full as she looked into the young woman's eyes. "No, Adaugo," she replied. "I've given what I could. But it is the people of Nyoka who carry the future now. The land has healed, and now it is time for you all to nurture it, to protect it, as I once did." Eki nodded, her gaze filled with respect. "We will. And we will remember what you have done for us. You've shown us what it means to truly care for the land, to honor it and respect it. We will carry that knowledge with us always." As the laughter and music of the feast filled the air, Mama Nyar felt a quiet peace settle in her heart. She had not regained all that she had lost, but she had found a new purpose. The people of Nyoka were thriving, the land was healed, and her role in their lives was no longer one of overwhelming power, but of gentle guidance. And in that, she had found her peace. As seasons continued to change, Mama Nyar's role in Nyoka evolved. The once immense power she had wielded, the sacred connection with the land that had once coursed through her like an unstoppable river, had transformed into something quieter. Though she could no longer hear the earth's whispers in the same way, there was still a bond, still a thread that tethered her to the land, albeit one that had become more delicate and far less consuming. She had embraced her new purpose, no longer the fierce protector she had once been, but rather a nurturer of the spirit of the village, a teacher, a guide, a healer of hearts rather than land. She spent her days with the youth of Nyoka, teaching them the old ways, passing down the wisdom she had once taken for granted. She shared stories of their ancestors, of the great battles fought to protect the land, and the spirits who watched over them. It was not just knowledge of the earth she imparted, but also of community, unity, and the respect of life in all its forms. Under her tutelage, the young ones learned not just the art of survival, but the deeper understanding of balance, the delicate dance between people and nature. With each lesson, Mama Nyar felt a renewal, a soft sense of fulfillment that did not come from her previous role as a warrior of the land but from the quiet fulfillment of helping the next generation understand their responsibility to it. The elders began to notice that Mama Nyar had come into a different phase of her life. She no longer sought the isolation she once craved, nor did she shun the wisdom they offered her. Instead, she had become an equal among them, her experience with the earth giving her an insight into the needs of the village that complemented their own. They began to rely on her counsel again, not just as the woman who had healed the land, but as a voice of reason, understanding, and peace. Though she still occasionally wandered to the river or sat beneath the baobab tree in moments of reflection, she was no longer haunted by the emptiness that had once consumed her. The weight of her sacrifice had not been forgotten, but she had come to understand that it was not the absence of her old power that defined her, but the quiet strength she had cultivated since. Mama Nyar had become a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the quiet of her heart, she no longer mourned what she had lost but instead honored what she had gained, the trust and love of her people, the knowledge that she had saved them, and the knowledge that, though she had sacrificed a part of herself, she had given everything for a purpose greater than her own. On one particularly warm evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Mama Nyar sat by the fire with Akin. The fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks into the air, and the sound of laughter and music drifted in from the village. Adaugo looked over at Mama Nyar, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Mama Nyar turned to her, her eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment, she said nothing, simply gazing at the flames. The question was not a new one, she had asked herself the same thing many times. Did she regret the sacrifices she had made to save Nyoka? Was there part of her that wished she could have kept the power that once made her invincible? But as she looked into Adaugo's eyes, she knew the answer. "No," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "I don't regret it. Not anymore." Adaugo studied her for a long moment, as though searching for the truth in her words. "You've given so much. You've given everything." Mama Nyar smiled, but it was not the same smile she had given years ago, an eager, bright smile filled with the energy of youthful power. This one was quieter, more knowing, more content. "I've given what I could," she said. "But the land, the people, they will carry on. I don't need to be at the center of it anymore. What matters is that Nyoka is thriving. What matters is that I can still be here to see it. To see you, to see all of you carry on what we've started together." Adaugo looked up at the sky, her expression thoughtful. "I think you'll always be at the center of it," she said quietly. "Even if you're not leading us the way you once did, you've given us something more. You've shown us that even in sacrifice, there is hope. That even when we face the hardest challenges, we can still rebuild, still find peace." Mama Nyar's heart swelled with pride, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something old and familiar deep within her, a warmth, a connection, not just to the land but to the people who had become her family. She had given everything to heal the land, to save Nyoka, but in return, she had found something far more precious: belonging, purpose, and the quiet joy of knowing that, even in sacrifice, there was always the potential for renewal. As the fire crackled on, and the stars began to appear in the night sky, Mama Nyar sat in peaceful contentment, surrounded by those she loved, knowing that her journey was not over. The land had healed, Nyoka was thriving, and though she had changed, she was still a part of it all, forever intertwined with the earth, the people, and the future she had helped to create. The seasons continued to pass, and with each new harvest, Nyoka flourished further, its people thriving as never before. Mama Nyar's role in the village had become more symbolic than functional, yet her presence was still deeply felt by all. She was no longer the powerful sorceress who could bend the land to her will. She had become something far more profound, a guardian of memory, a living connection between the past, present, and future of Nyoka. Despite the prosperity, the shadow of what she had given up remained a quiet undercurrent in her life. At night, when the village slept, Mama Nyar would sometimes wander the edges of the land, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. The connection she had once shared with the land was not gone, but it had transformed into something different. The bond was now more like a memory, a whisper in the wind, a fleeting sensation she could no longer grasp with the same certainty as before. Still, she could not escape the deep knowing that the sacrifice she had made was not without consequence. It had carved something into her spirit that could never be undone. She had given everything to save Nyoka, and in doing so, she had lost a part of herself that could never return. But over time, Mama Nyar came to accept this truth, and in accepting it, she found a deep sense of peace. She was no longer bound by the expectations of others or by the need to prove herself. She had done her part, and now it was time for others to carry the mantle of leadership. Her role was to guide, to teach, and to support, but not to control. One evening, as the full moon bathed the village in silver light, Mama Nyar sat outside her hut, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the trees around her. Adaugo approached, her silhouette glowing in the moonlight. The young woman had grown in ways Mama Nyar could not have imagined when they first met, her presence strong and confident. Adaugo sat beside her, the quiet between them comfortable, filled only with the sound of the night. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," Adaugo began, her voice thoughtful. "About finding purpose, even after sacrifice. About how we can rebuild, even when we feel broken." Mama Nyar turned to her, nodding gently, knowing that Adaugo had begun to understand something deeper than many of the elders. "You've done well, Adaugo," Mama Nyar said softly. "The people look to you now, just as they once looked to me. The land is no longer mine alone to protect, it belongs to all of us, just as our future does." Adaugo smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "Sometimes, I feel the weight of it all. The responsibility of the village, of the land, of everything you sacrificed to make this possible." Mama Nyar placed a gentle hand on Adaugo's arm, her touch warm, steady. "You are ready," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You may not feel ready, but none of us truly are when the time comes. We rise to meet the moment because the land and the people are always calling for us. They will guide you, just as they guided me." Adaugo looked down at her hands, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the dirt. "I know the people will need me. But what if I can't do it the way you did?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Mama Nyar chuckled softly, the sound light and comforting. "You mustn't try to do it the way I did," she said. "I was once a woman driven by the need to protect, to control, to command the land with my very soul. But that is not the way forward. You must learn to listen to the land, to the people, and to your heart. Leadership is not about power, it is about understanding, about nurturing, and most importantly, about knowing when to let go." Adaugo turned to look at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. But what if I fail? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Nyar's gaze softened, and she looked out into the distance, where the moonlight shimmered over the river. You may fail, she said, her voice steady. And when you do, you will learn. You will grow. But that is not failure. That is life. The land will always guide you, and the people will always need you, even when you falter. As long as you remain true to yourself, as long as you remember what we've built together, you will never truly fail. The words settled deep in Adaugo's heart. She knew Mama Nyar spoke from experience, and though she still carried the weight of her own doubts, she felt something in her heart begin to stir, a sense of quiet strength, a flicker of the resolve that had once defined the woman sitting beside her. Mama Nyar was no longer the fierce protector who had once saved them all. She was something else now, something more enduring. She had passed through the fire of her sacrifice and emerged with wisdom, with understanding. And in that, she had become not just a leader, but a true guide for the future. The future that Adaugo was now ready to embrace, with Mama Nyar's guidance and the lessons of the land to support her. The moon continued to rise, its light bathing the village in a soft glow, and for the first time in many years, Mama Nyar felt a sense of completeness. She had done what she was meant to do. Nyoka was flourishing, and the next chapter was already unfolding, just as it should.